Today I want to share with you my favorite spring detox soup. This is a traditional Swiss Alpine herb soup that's very easy to make and very cleansing. You're gonna love it, so let's get started. Hi sweet friends! If we're meeting for the first time, I'm Mary from Mary's Nest, an author of the Modern Pioneer Cookbook and now the Modern Pioneer Pantry, and I'd like to welcome you to my kitchen. Let's first go over all the ingredients that we're going to need to make this soup. And the first ingredient is 2 tablespoons of butter. And I used unsalted butter. But if you have salted butter on hand and that's all you have right now in your fridge, you can certainly use that too. Just cut back a little bit on the salt, which we'll mention later. Now we're going to use butter in this recipe because this is a Swiss Alpine recipe and butter would have traditionally been used. But if you want to make this dairy-free, you can certainly do that, and you can replace the butter with whatever oil you like using, a traditional oil that's very healing, like olive oil or coconut oil. And next you're going to need 1 medium yellow onion, and you're going to want to peel it and dice it. But I just want to say one thing about the onion. If you don't have a yellow onion, don't worry. That's what I used when I was making this soup. But if you have a white onion or a red onion or just some scallions, anything in the onion family will work in this recipe. You want to remember that this is home cooking. Don't feel you have to be really exact. When traditional cultures were making this soup, they used what they had on hand. And we can do the same thing. Next, you're going to want a medium carrot and 2 stalks of celery. Peel the carrot if you want, and then you're going to want to dice both the carrot and the celery. Now, I also want to mention something about the celery. If you're lucky enough at your grocery store to find something that's called celery root or celeriac, which is actually different than celery, definitely pick that up. And use the celery root. It looks like a sort of bulbous type vegetable with greenery growing out of it. Save the greenery for another recipe, and then peel the celeriac and then dice that up and use that in place of celery. It's really flavorful and it's a wonderful vegetable to include in our traditional foods kitchen. So if you're lucky enough to find that, you can definitely substitute that for the 2 stalks of celery. You're also going to need 1 tablespoon of all-purpose flour. But if you want to leave the flour out, you can. The reason I like to add in flour is it does create a little bit of a roux with the fat that we used in the beginning, so that you don't have any fat floating on the top when the soup is finished. It doesn't make the soup thick like a stew. Your soup is still going to be brothy, but you won't have any fat floating on top. If you leave out the flour, you might see a little bit of that oil or butter, somewhat, melted butter, obviously, floating on top. However, because there are some other starchy ingredients we are going to be adding to the soup, that does help bind with the oil. So if you do, or the butter, so if you do want to leave it out at this point, you can. For the liquid, you're going to want some type of broth. You can use a vegetable broth or you can use a chicken broth. I'm using a chicken broth. Now, can you use a bone broth? Sure, if you want. Anything will be fine in this regard, and in a pinch, you can also use water. Now, a traditional grain used in this soup is barley, and we love barley. And what I like to do is add 1/4 cup of barley to this soup. But if there is another grain that you like, you can certainly use that. Now, I used pearled barley, but you can also use hulled barley. The only difference is the hulled barley is going to make a thicker, richer soup, and it's going to require a little more cooking time. Next, you're going to want 2 medium potatoes, and you're going to want the waxy potatoes. These are the thin-skinned potatoes. They hold up best in a brothy soup like this. And you're going to want to peel them, and you're going to want to cut them into approximately 1-inch cubes. For the greens in this soup, now not the herbs, we're going to talk about those in a minute, but for the greens that we're going to add to this soup, you're going to want a packed cup of something like Savoy cabbage or kale or Swiss chard, anything in the greens family that you like, and you really want to pack that cup. And whatever greens you're using, just chop them up best you can, just a rough chop, and then pack them into that cup to measure them. Now for the herbs, we're going to want chives, parsley, dill, thyme, and lovage. Now don't worry if you don't have lovage. You can just substitute some of the leaves from your celery. You're going to need 2 tablespoons of chopped chives and 1 tablespoon of chopped parsley. And you can use either the flat leaf Italian parsley, which is what I like and that's what I use, or you can use the curly variety, whatever you have on hand. And then you're going to want 1 teaspoon each of the dill, thyme, and lovage, or the celery leaves, and just chop it up. Now for this soup, if you're a good forager, be sure to look for some nettles, or as they're known, stinging nettles, so wear gloves if you're foraging for them. But all you're going to need to do before you add a handful of nettles to the soup is you're going to want to blanch them. Once you blanch them and chop them up, then go ahead and add them to the soup. And why would you want to add nettles to the soup? Nettles are so rich in vitamins and minerals, and I will definitely share more about them in the blog post that'll correspond with this video. For seasoning this soup, you're going to want nutmeg and then sea salt and freshly ground black pepper. You're going to want about 1/4 teaspoon of nutmeg, and if you've got the whole nutmeg and you can grate it into the soup, all the better. The freshly grated nutmeg really has a wonderful flavor. And then I like to just use a fine ground sea salt. You're going to need 1/2 teaspoon of that and 1/4 teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper. And then once you make the soup, you can definitely taste it and adjust the seasonings as you want. Then on the side, it's great if you can have some cultured cream or sour cream or creme fraiche, and also some grated Gruyere cheese, or what here in the United States we call Swiss cheese, which I believe is Emmental, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And I'll tell you why you want to have some dairy with this soup. Now, can you leave the dairy out if you want, especially if you don't eat dairy? Yes, but there's a reason behind why any soup that has a lot of greens in it also is very well complemented for our bodies if we include dairy. And this is something that traditional cultures have done for a millennia. A lot of greens, especially things like Swiss chard and kale and so on and so forth, contain an ingredient called oxalates. And you've probably heard a lot about them in the news lately because people have been adding kale and spinach and different greens like that to smoothies that and then they're eating them or drinking these things every single day, and they're going in raw. And that can be a little bit of a problem because oxalates tend to form kidney stones in a lot of people. But traditional cultures, first of all, they weren't eating greens all year long. They were primarily eating them in the spring when they were growing, and they were young spring greens, and they understood that they were very cleansing to them, to their bodies after a long winter of maybe eating cured meats and ferments and foods like that. These spring greens were very cleansing and detoxing. However, they also knew to cook them and to serve them with some dairy. And the reason is the dairy binds with the oxalates and helps move them through the body so as to help slow down and prevent the formation of kidney stones. So this is how traditional cultures ate greens. Now, I'm not a doctor, I'm not anything in the medical profession. I'm a home cook, and I always like to look to how traditional cultures ate, how they ate seasonally, how they properly prepared their food, and then when and how they consumed it. And so that's what I'm sharing with you, how traditional cultures ate their greens. But certainly, if you've had kidney stones or if you think you have a propensity to them and your doctor's told you to avoid foods rich in oxalates, definitely listen to whatever medical advice you receive from a medical doctor, a integrative medicine doctor, homeopathic doctor, whatever the case may be. But I've wanted to share with you how traditional cultures did eat their greens, cooked and with dairy. Now we're going to get ready to make the soup, but before we do that, I want to share something with you that's very exciting. This Alpine herb soup is featured in the 200th issue of Backwoods Home magazine. This is quite a milestone for this magazine, in that it has published so far 200 issues, and I feel so honored that my Alpine soup recipe is going to be featured in their upcoming edition. And I'm so happy to share with you that the wonderful folks at Backwoods Home magazine have a special deal for my viewers. They're offering 50% off a subscription to their Backwoods Homes magazine. And if you want to get their Self-Reliance magazine, they're also offering 50% off that as well. So you can get both for 50% off. If you've already seen this magazine, you know how wonderful it is, as well as Self-Reliance. These are both terrific magazines. I just love them. And I highly recommend that you have these on your bookshelf. They provide such a wealth of information that any homesteader, no matter where you live, it doesn't matter if you're in the city, the suburbs, or the country, we all have that homesteading heart when we like to make foods homemade and be self-reliant and independent and being able to provide for ourselves. These magazines share such a wealth of information. And the fact that Backwoods Homes is in its 200th issue really speaks to the value of this magazine. And I'm just so excited about it, and I'm so excited to be in their 200th issue. It's really an honor. And so I hope you'll pick up a copy and be able to enjoy and read the whole article that I've written along with the recipe. Alrighty, now let's make the soup. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is get a medium soup pot or saucepan, whatever you have on hand. You're going to put your fat in there, whether it's butter or oil, whatever you're using, and you're going to bring that up to temp, let it be sizzling a bit, and then add in your onions, and then saute them for a few minutes until they start to become somewhat translucent. Next, go ahead and add in your garlic and your carrots and your celery, or the celeriac if you're using that. And stir everything around and continue to simmer a bit as everything starts to soften. If you're using the flour, at this point, sprinkle the flour on top of everything in your soup pot and just saute that for about 2 minutes or so, just to cook the flour and let it meld a bit with the fat. Next, go ahead and add in your liquid. Your vegetable broth, your chicken broth, your water, whatever you're using, and also at this point, go ahead and add in your barley. Bring everything up to a boil and then turn your heat down to a simmer and let everything simmer for 10 minutes. After 10 minutes, go ahead and add in your potatoes and continue to let everything simmer for another 10 minutes. Now you're going to go ahead and add in your greens. You're going to add in your cabbage or your kale or your Swiss chard, whatever you're using. And you're going to get that into your soup pot and let everything continue to simmer for another 5 minutes. After that 5 minutes, you're going to go ahead and add in all your herbs plus your blanched nettles if you're using them. Let everything simmer for about 2 to 3 minutes, and you're going to really start to smell the release of all of those essential oils that the herbs bring to this soup. So after about 2 or 3 minutes, you're going to go ahead and add in your nutmeg, your salt, and your pepper. Stir everything, let it simmer another minute or two, and then you're ready to serve. All you want to do is give it a taste and see if you want to add any additional seasoning. Now you're going to want to go ahead and ladle the hot soup into bowls, and if you're using dairy, which I recommend, put a dollop on top of the soup of sour cream or creme fraiche or cultured cream, whatever you keep on hand. And then add a generous grating of a nice cheese like Gruyere or Emmental. Well, now let's give this a taste and see how it came. I've tried to get a little bit of everything. I think the only thing I don't have on my spoon is the potato. The soup is so delicious. Oh, it just feels so healing, so cleansing. I love it, and you're gonna love it too. Now, if you'd like more recipes for detox soups, mineral-rich soups and meals, and more, be sure to click on this video over here, where I have everything curated for you in a playlist. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country Kitchen. Love and God bless.